Hello, this is John Dennis Bain. Today is Thursday, February 19th of 2015. I want to tell you about my newly published book entitled Divorce is Not a Sin. At first I wanted to be a little cryptic about the title and call it D-I-V-O-R-C-E is not an S-I-N, but I really don't know how many Tammy Wynette fans are still out there, but in case it might be lost on you still, perhaps the simpler title that I decided on is the best. Divorce is not a sin. It's not only the title of the book, but it is my theological conviction as a minister and as someone who has been marrying people and doing marital counseling for over 40 years. I want to introduce this book to you. You may or may not have been divorced, but we all know someone who has been divorced. At this point in our world's history, probably is not any one of us or anyone in the sound of my voice now who does not have a member of their family or a close friend who has been through a difficult separation or divorce, a dissolution of their marriage. It's not the kind of thing that people set out to do or plan for or think might even happen, but it does happen. And what I want to do in this video is read the introduction to you and also the first chapter. If you feel or sense from hearing these words that this book might be helpful to someone who has experienced a divorce, then please by all means share it with them. That's who this message is for. It's primarily for Christians who've experienced divorce. People who are not Christians or people who are not particularly religious are not concerned about whether or not any of their actions are sins. Sin is something we feel has to do with our relationship with God. When we sin, that's a God thing. It's something we do against God. We break one of God's laws or commandments. And so if we may be deeply religious, deeply devout, and someone may be a very devout Christian and still divorce has been a part of their life experience, a part of their past, part of their history, and maybe even a part of their present. So let me share this and these few words with you by way of introduction. Instead of saying more about the book, let me say that as I read this, it speaks best because it has so much work that I've put into it, and I can't say it better by simply a casual description. The book is dedicated to my wife, Terry Evans Bain, and we've been married this year in September will be 39 years. And I have often used the joke that you've probably heard that she and I have never even talked about or considered or thought about divorce, though we have contemplated murder on many occasions. Well, that may or may not be funny, but that's the nature of marriage. Sometimes we love each other and sometimes not so much. But I'm appreciative of my wife and grateful to God for my long marriage, our long marriage. And I can't say that's because we've done all the right things, that we haven't made any mistakes, or that our love is perfect, or that we ourselves are perfect or in any way. It's really the grace of God that makes anything about our lives enjoyable and wonderful and acceptable. And so we thank the Lord for our continued relationship, and I assume we'll be together as we promised till death do us part. But doesn't everybody believe that? We all believe that our fairy tale marriage will continue to last. Well, this is the introduction. Let me share that with you. Someone once asked Johnny Carson, the late great comedian and Tonight Show host, why divorce was so expensive. His answer was, because it's worth it. Divorce can be a welcomed release and relief, or a heartbreaking tragedy, or both. It can be at the same time the ending of a fairy tale dream and or a launch into a new beginning. Divorce can mark the loss of love, home, family, end of abuse, neglect, fear, and anger. But is it a sin? Considering all the difficulties associated with divorce, everything leading up to the ending and the different life that follows in its wake, only the devoutly religious are concerned with this particular spiritual question. Is it a sin? Religious devotees of whatever faith or spiritual practice believe that their moral values will insulate them from many of the trials and tribulations of the secular world. They hold on to their beliefs as if they were an anchor in stormy weather. They believe that the family that prays together stays together. Sometimes the anchor holds, sometimes it does not. Though touted incorrectly by many recent pundits, Christian divorce rates are at about 42%, while the rate among couples in the non-religious world are around 50%. That lower rate for Christians, however, is provided that the couple is actively involved in their faith community, their church, and attends services and activities regularly. Divorce rates for Christians who cohabitated or lived together before their marriage is the same as the average rates for non-Christians. This book is for Christians who have experienced divorce. It's not the author's purpose to recommend or encourage divorce. Jesus himself taught that God permitted divorce only because of the hardness of our hearts. That's from Matthew 19:8. But yes, God permitted divorce. Divorce can be a great enough difficulty to deal with on its own without having to worry if God is also antagonistic toward us or has rejected us because of any unexpected, unplanned turn that our life might take. God has never desired to compile our woes. He's always wanted to deliver us from them. I've performed many wedding ceremonies over my 40 years' life in Christian ministry. I do not believe that any bride or groom has ever stood before me on their wedding day with the thought of possible future divorce looming in their minds. I believe that divorce was not even a part of their imagination of possibilities. And yet I know that many of the couples that I have joined in holy matrimony over the years are no longer couples. They have become unjoined by divorce. What I want to tell you in this book is that God is in favor of new beginnings, even if they come through endings. He is the God of second chances and more. He is the God of compassion, understanding, and redemption. He wants to help you and me to overcome all of our failures, mistakes, regrets, all the failures, mistakes, and regrets that we humans all seem to pile so high. He wants to pick us up along with the pieces of our lives and carry us forward into something new and almost always something better. God's not against you. He's for you. He loves you unconditionally. Chapter 1. The Law of Divorce. Christians are taught that sin is the breaking of God's commandments, His statutes, His law. The source of that teaching is the Bible. The commands of God are revealed to us through the Bible. But the first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, are especially described by the Scriptures themselves as the law. The Christian Bible is composed of 66 different books divided into 2 different parts, the Old Testament and the New Testament. The Old Testament is the translation of the Hebrew holy books that records God's interaction with the human race in Genesis chapters 1 through 11. And further with his special interaction primarily with the Hebrew race from Genesis chapter 12 to the end of the book of Malachi. The New Testament is the record of the birth, life, death, and resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth, the founding of the Christian church and all of its relevant doctrine and revelation from the book of Matthew to the book of Revelation. That's 27 books. Think of the word testament as contract, covenant, agreement, or treaty. Practitioners of Judaism today, of course, do not think of their scriptures as the old or former. They hold to these 39 books as God's revelation of himself to his chosen people. They do not recognize the validity of the authority of the New Testament at all. But Christians see the holy writings of the Old Testament as foundational to the coming of Jesus and the recording of the New Testament. To believers in Jesus, he is the one, Messiah, or Christ, anointed one, the one promised in the Old Testament and realized in the New. So when Christians deal with questions about sin, or the breaking of God's law, the Old Testament is the place to begin with study and examination. The ancient Hebrew Bible was divided into 3 parts. It's not so with modern Bibles studied by Christians. The most important part was the first 5 books, formerly listed, called the Torah, the law. The second part was the Nebi'im, or the prophets. The third division was the Ketubim, or the writings. Our first concern for this study is, what does the law say about divorce? The law of God is sometimes referred to, even in the scriptures themselves, as the law of Moses. The story is recorded in the book of Exodus about God's raising of a man named Moses to lead all Israelite slaves that were in Egypt back to the land that God had promised as an inheritance to the very first of their family and nation, Abraham. That's recorded in Genesis 12. During the historic wilderness trek of God's people from Egypt to their promised land, he met with them and delivered his law and commandments to them. God called Moses to the top of Mount Sinai and gave his law to him to be the basis of his special covenant with them from that time and for all eternity. Here, Moses is said to have received all of the law of God inscribed upon tablets of stone. Cecil B. DeMille's movie, The 10 Commandments, has fostered an absurd and faulty idea that all that Moses brought down from the holy mountain with him were 2 tombstone-sized stones with 5 of the 10 Commandments on one and the other 5 on the other stone. When Moses came down from the mount after 40 days and 40 nights, he labored with arms full of tablets that contained all of God's laws and commandments that were to comprise the bulk of what was to become the Torah. The 10 Commandments were just a small part of one chapter. That's Exodus chapter 20. These tablets would later be stored in the cabinet described as the Ark of the Covenant, which means that which carries the covenant. God gave his law to Israel to govern and lead them as they became residents of the Holy Land. The law contained all the instructions that they would need for their life as the people of God. Let's look together at Deuteronomy chapter 24, verses 1 through 4. The Old Testament is Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. So the 5th book of the Torah is the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 24, verses 1 through 4. Here are those 4 verses. Verse 1. When a man hath taken a wife and married her, and it come to pass that she find no favor in his eyes, because he has found some uncleanness in her, then let him write her a bill of divorcement, and give it in her hand, and send her out of his house. Verse 2. And when she is departed out of his house, she may go and be another man's wife. And if the latter husband hate her, and write her a bill of divorcement, and gives it into her hand, and sends her out of his house, or if the latter husband die, which took her to be his wife, her former husband, which sent her away, may not take her again to be his wife, after that she is defiled. For this is an abomination before the Lord, and you will not cause the land to sin, which the Lord thy God gives thee for an inheritance. At this time in Israel's history, women had no rights of their own. They were considered to be the property first of their father and then of their husband. An unmarried woman remained under the authority of her father. God would eventually lead his people from this cultural inequality, but in this instance, only men divorcing their wives is considered. Now, Christian men and women may correctly seek God's will about divorce for themselves from this passage of Scripture. Husbands divorcing their wives and wives divorcing their husbands as equal beneficiaries of a greater and more complete revelation. But even though men divorcing their wives is the subject of this part of the Israelite code, the protection of women is the purpose of the law. At the time, the Israelite men who tired of their wives and wished to be rid of them were simply throwing them out of the house in total rejection. The husband would send his wife away with only the clothes that she wore. She had no right to any belongings, money, children, or property. She was left bereft of all human comfort and had no ability to legally or morally start a new life because she was still technically another man's wife. God was gradually teaching his people that observing or promoting inequality between men and women, and between Jew and Gentile, between races and between bondman and free, was wrong. The law presented in this passage prohibited husbands from casting out their wives with no moral or legal consideration or protection. Let's look carefully at this legal passage to see what it says and what it does not say about God's permission to divorce and the woman's rights under the law. In Deuteronomy 24:1 it says, "When a man hath taken a wife and married her, and it come to pass that she find no favor in his eyes, because he hath found some uncleanness in her, then let him write her a bill of divorcement, and give it in her hand, and send her out of his house." In the case proposed in this law, a man is inclined to end his relationship with his wife. Why? Well, it says that she no longer finds favor in his eye. This statement reminds me of the song New Favorite by singer Alison Krauss. He's got a new favorite, maybe. Note, the wife in question is not said to have broken God's law or that she has failed of the grace or favor of God. This woman is not condemned or critically found wanting by God, only by her husband. It's talking about his eyes, his point of view, his opinion, his judgment. She finds no favor in his eyes. Doesn't say anything about God's eyes and what he sees in her. The husband is said to have come to this negative opinion of his wife because he has found some uncleanness in her. What does this mean? Well, first, what does this accusation not mean? He finds some uncleanness in her. Well, it does not mean that his wife had committed adultery or any other moral or spiritual abrogation of God's law. The penalty under the law for infidelity and adultery in the bonds of the law was not divorce, it was death. Leviticus chapter 20, verse 10. Also read verse 2 again. "And when she is departed out of his house, she may go and be another man's wife." That is Deuteronomy 24:2. And if the wife that is being rejected by her husband in verse 1 were guilty of adultery or any other moral infraction of the law, she would carry her guilt with her. She would not morally or legally become, she could not morally or legally become another man's wife because her adultery followed her. If she were an adulterer, anyone that married her would be committing adultery as well. God has judged that this woman can be permitted to remarry. That's what Deuteronomy 24:2 says. Therefore, her former husband's issue with her is not a scriptural or legal issue. It's personal. The husband finds no favor in his wife, and to the contrary, finds uncleanness in her. This is his own personal discovery based upon his particular judgment of her. His feelings for his wife have no legal foundation, and no personal argument is even offered. You see, God had already provided detailed guidelines in other passages in the law for dealing with immorality, infidelity, or other grounds for judging a marriage partner guilty are sinful. What is being addressed in Deuteronomy 24 is the dissolution of a marriage with no legal or scriptural cause. A divorce based on whimsy, boredom, or simply casual rejection. In other words, this law governs a situation where a husband is tired of his wife and wants to get rid of her, but has no legal grounds for divorce. Remember, as we're interpreting this, it also may be a woman who's tired of her husband and just wants to get rid of him. Since this occurred often and men had no legal recourse for the action that they wanted to pursue, they were simply ejecting their wives from their house and home without any legal action. At this point in Israeli society, husbands were just sending their wives out of the house. In other scriptures, the phrase putting away is used. Malachi chapter 2 verse 16 or Matthew 5:31. In Matthew chapter 19 verse 3, the Pharisees asked Jesus, "Is it lawful for a man to put away his wife for every cause?" These religious leaders were asking Jesus his opinion or interpretation of the Deuteronomy 24 law. They recognized that the Deuteronomy 24 law dealt with the circumstance of a man who might reject his wife for just any cause. Not a legal cause, but just any old cause. Their question was, can a man get rid of his wife just because he is tired of her and doesn't have a good reason? This law states, yes, you can get rid of your wife for any reason that suits you, but you have to present her with a written document of divorcement. If she has that document in her hand, then she can legally start her life over by remarrying. The divorcement document dissolves the marriage so that the man and the woman are no longer husband and wife. The woman no longer has a husband, and she may remarry without committing adultery or any other infraction of God's law. This sounds rather crass, doesn't it? In Matthew 19:8, Jesus says that God permitted this kind of legal action only because of the hardness of the human heart. It's always heartless and cruel to simply reject anyone out of hand, and with only superfluous reasoning. If God had not permitted this avenue to men, Israeli society would have been plagued with rejected, homeless women, and adultery and fornication would have been rampant. This situation is not divine, but humanity requires it because it's so imperfect. To further demonstrate the calloused and cruel reasoning of the husband described in this scenario, the law says that he has found some uncleanness in his wife. The Hebrew words translating some uncleanness are the Hebrew words ervat davar. This exact phraseology is only found in one other passage in the Bible, in Deuteronomy chapter 23 verse 14. Look at Deuteronomy 23 starting with verse 12. Thou shalt have a place also without the camp or outside the camp, whither thou shalt go forth abroad. And thou shalt have a paddle upon thy weapon, and it shall be that when you will ease thyself abroad, thou shalt dig therewith, and shalt turn back and cover that which cometh from thee. For the Lord thy God walketh in the midst of thy camp, to deliver thee, and to give up thine enemies before thee. Therefore shalt thy camp be holy, that he see no unclean thing. That's the words ervat davar. So that the Lord sees no unclean thing in thee, and turn away from thee. In case the meaning of this passage escapes you, and it is a little bit cloudy, these are instructions for how the Israelites were to relieve their bowels outside the camp, and covered up with a paddle to prevent contamination of the camp by the feces of the campers. The law humorously says God walks in the midst of your camp and he doesn't want to step in your droppings. So this makes use of this phrase in the divorce code, very descriptive of the husband's attitude toward the wife that he wants to eject. Why does he want to throw her out of the house? Because every time he looks at her, he just wishes that he could cover her up with dirt outside the encampment, like so much human refuse. Believe me, even though this kind of language seems harsh, I have actually met many husbands and wives who have this very low opinion of their spouse. They feel disgust, loathing, even as Deuteronomy 24:3 says, hatred, no love at all. This law states clearly that the issuance of a writing of divorcement completely dissolves the marriage. The man no longer has a wife. The woman no longer has a husband. There was no concept of an ex-husband or an ex-wife proffered in the Scriptures. When the divorced woman remarried, as she was legally permitted to do, according to Deuteronomy 24:2, she only had one husband, not two. If the man remarries, he is the husband of one wife. If the woman remarries, she is the wife of one husband. Divorce destroys and dissolves marriage. It makes it go away entirely. So divorce is not a sin. Permission to divorce is given in the law. God revealed a guide to Moses that clearly explains his permission for the legal dissolution of marriage. Man may not put marriage asunder, as it said in Mark 10:9, but God can put marriage asunder, and he does, through his declaration of permission in Deuteronomy 24. A special note, I just glossed over an important phrase in Deuteronomy 24:3. This is parallel to the one in 24:1 in the case study example that's given in the law. The unfortunate woman who is divorced by her husband and is permitted by law to remarry does so. But in this new marriage, her husband comes to realize that he hates her. So the phrases "finds some uncleanness in her" and "he hates her" have parallel meaning. Students of the Bible are aware that often any mention of uncleanness is a reference to some spiritual dirtiness or deed. But in this case, the two phrases are two different ways of saying the same thing. Both of these men have decided on purely personal and unspiritual grounds that they do not love this woman. In fact, they have grown to despise her. And they want out of their lives and homes. They want her out of their lives and out of their homes. They cannot have her stoned or condemned to death for any moral or spiritual impurity or disobedience to the law, but they want to get rid of her nonetheless. The law of God grants this kind of divorce.